Spitfire Audio is a group of composers making professional tools for other composers. It's a community that's growing by the day. Especially when we make our tools more affordable, like during a sale. With hours left to go with this year's spring sale, we thought it would be good to get together and have a beer and answer probing questions posted to us by the community. The probe sounds painful.
Hi, I'm Paul Thompson, Christian's business partner and co-founder of Spitfire Audio.
Hi, I'm Oliver and I'm a composer at Spitfire Audio.
Hi, I'm Louis. I'm also another composer at Spitfire Audio.
Hi, I'm Christian and I'm a YouTuber. No, that's a joke. I'm Christian, I'm about to be drunk. We're all having a little drink, aren't we?
Mm-hmm. Of course.
Cheers.
So what's your, Peroni?
Peroni.
I'm having a vermouth. It's a sort of a martini. I drink that a lot in Spain. It's absolutely amazing. It gets you there much quicker.
And Louis?
I've just got a Guinness here.
Not local to you, Oliver, but not a million miles away. I got an Estrella.
Good choice.
Very
Good
nice.
choice.
And it's icy cold. And how has our drinking habits been since lockdown?
Silence.
Paul?
I think it's fair to say. Well, I've actually been quite good this week. I've been investigating with some recommendations from some other composer friends of mine, some low alcohol beers. So there's some of them are just horrendous, are really soapy and awful. But I found a couple that are actually really nice. So I've been kind of spacing it out a bit. But it's the weekend, so
Hallelujah. You, Oliver?
Well, I think I'm spending all the money that I'm saving on flights on booze these days. I have a kind of a passion for a nice Rioja since living in Spain. I have this rule that I don't drink Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday for 3 days, not even a drop. It's a bit of a self-disciplinary test as well. But then Thursday has become the new wine day.
And you, Louis?
No, I haven't been drinking much through the week. Usually on a weekend, there's a little treat while I'm watching something on Disney+.
I would say that my drinking has become definitely more consistent. I'm not drinking as much, but it's very much part of my day.
a steady drip.
A steady drip. So what we're going to do is we're going to alternate who's questioning. And we're also going to alternate who we're going to question. So the person who's asking the question gets to pick who's going to answer it. So we can be really cruel with each other. Okay, so first question to you, Paul. Do you pay a living wage to all of your staff, including interns, etc., etc.?
We had quite a lot of discussions about this, probably about 4 or 5 years ago as we were growing. And we were looking at our pay scales in relation to industry standards and trying to make sure that we were at the upper end of the industry standard. I think that's, I mean, it's not really something that I massively am involved in now. It's more Will, our CEO, and Mike, our COO, who do that. But we absolutely hugely value our incredibly talented team. And so we pay them very well.
And so that means basically a free sample library every month, which I think is very fair. Can I boast, Paul? I think I'm really proud that not a single, we've got a Spitfire family of 70 now. And we've not put one person in furlough, and that includes we're still employing freelancers on a freelance basis. And we've just basically had to retool a couple of people who are events organisers, and you can imagine there are certain limitations to that at the moment. So that's something I'm incredibly proud of is that there's 70 people working in the music industry who have not felt the pinch, which is something to be proud of. And that's thanks also for your support and all of that.
Cheeky question. How is Oliver so slick, especially with his hair? And is he single?
Which hair? You should smell my aftershave as well. No, is that a serious question?
It really is. I saw it come in.
I don't know. I since I'm young, I was always interested in kind of fashion a little bit as well. I look up to these kind of 60s, 70s how can I say, musicians as well. I take a lot of inspirations from there, and I love dressing funky, I guess, as well, in a way. And I guess that leads to the other question, which is, no, I'm married to a fashion designer.
There's your secret.
So she actually dresses me every morning.
And a dad too, which I think makes you very, very unsingle.
Yes, absolutely. We had a baby about a year ago, baby girl.
So, guys, I learned where the word royalties comes from. Do you, Paul, know where the word royalties comes from?
No, I don't.
It's about exploitation of land, and basically, particularly when taking minerals out of the land. So you could farm land, and that would be landowners. But if you're physically extracting minerals, you would have to pay the royalty.
Oh, very interesting.
There you go. So it's gold, diamonds, that kind of stuff. Regardless of the landowner, the monarch would always get a royalty. You will have to pay the royalty.
I've got a question for Louis by a gentleman called Tom Parry. My question is, for someone graduating from university with a music/music technology degree, what are some things you would advise them to do in order to get their first job/piece of work, apart from creating a show reel?
I can't really speak in terms of a university graduate because I actually haven't been to university. But little things I've done to kind of get work I've got some friends who are really into screenwriting and stuff, and constantly making short films. So I was lucky enough to score their kinds of projects. But I have a general consensus that most university students are usually looking for a composer to make short films. So I guess that's a really good way to start, just getting your work out there and getting stuff to write.
Definitely, yeah. It's probably important to just get yourself out there as a musician, to like just creating stuff, maybe a YouTube channel, releasing an album, just have an all-around cool presence. I'd say digitally as well, looking into the future, just to have like your name popping around, trying to maybe go to some events or be part of some forums and groups, and always help each other out, I believe, because it will always come around. I think that's something. That's how I got the job actually at Spitfire, because someone gave me a ticket to an event where I then met Christian. So it's kind of friends and picking each other up, I feel is important.
Yeah, being present, I think, is very, very important. I think it is those, there are three composers that I work with: yourself, Oliver, Homai, and Kellen, who just showed up. Basically, it's the only way of describing it, really.
This one's for you, Christian.
Okay.
Will you ever introduce an optional subscription service?
I think there's something inherently really nerve-wracking about applying sounds to a production that may become a franchise, that may go on for years and years and years, and relying for someone to keep that service going. So I therefore think most professional composers like to have the stuff sitting on their local drives and like to know that they will be able to update it in the future. I cite someone like Charlie Klaus, who does the Saw franchise, has been for years and years. I think he's done 9 of them now. He has to keep old rigs for those old plugins and stuff that aren't available anymore. And I think that's my main reticence against doing it. Paul, I'm sure you have some input here.
I had a problem the other day with a very well-known visual editing software where I couldn't actually, it took me nearly an hour to get going because there was some kind of, I couldn't log in because the server was down, and I had to log in order to sync something before I could start editing. So my reticence is partly practical on that basis, that I would never want to be captive to not being able to actually work because some cloud system has gone offline. Collaborating
with the likes of Hans Zimmer or Olafur Arnolds or the LCO, and then just kind of putting it in this kind of pool of stuff that is just suddenly takes the value away from it. And I think that what I'm really into is I love the fact that we make lots of stuff, because it basically means there's lots of choice for people, which means that not everyone's using the same stuff. So as a young composer, Oliver, it's subscription models. I mean, I'm not talking about like someone who's just starting out. I'm talking about someone at your position. Is that something like you go, damn, I wish I could have a subscription model?
I don't think so. If I put myself in in the shoes of like working on different projects, because I'd use like samples more project based. So I'd probably, but I mean, it depends on the subscription model. If you can maybe just subscribe for a month because you feel like, oh, I need a harpsichord for this one project, then it might be useful, but then it's also quite nice to then add to your collection. It's like buying new instruments, and it's nice to then have them and be, yeah, I don't think it would be hugely appealing to me, to be honest.
The Westworld clip was such tremendous fun and an education to work on. Could Spitfire use its influence to persuade content owners to make more such clips available? Paul, I think it's an opportunity. This is like a total kind of triumph that you've nailed this opportunity. Can you give us a bit of context why it is difficult to nail this kind of right, and how you went about doing it, and are we going to do it in the future?
So firstly, why hasn't it happened before? Well, rights holders keep things like work prints under enormous security, because if you get a leak of some kind of content that's still a work in progress, it's not just that it can kind of damage the value of the show, but it could also, if things leak before they're broadcast, then it's huge problems and all that kind of stuff. So there's an inherent fear attached to the handing over of these kind of video assets. Now, the idea that somebody would take that the next step and say, okay, you can have this version without the score to practice on, it's just nobody would ever do that. So that's why there isn't anything like that available. It's unprecedented. So you either have to write to one of the very few films that doesn't have a score, a traditional musical score like The Birds, or find something and just take all of the audio off, and then you can't hear the interplay of the dialogue and all that kind of stuff. So that's why it's very hard to get hold of these kind of materials. Now, we were thinking about doing something like this, about trying to give people something to work on during lockdown. And Christian, we were talking about our things that we'd worked on.
Yeah.
And then at some point during the conversation, we just thought, wow, I wonder if one of our kind of very much more successful friends might be able to let us have a clip. So I reached out to J.J. Abrams, who is just the loveliest guy, a really, really nice guy. And he is obviously a composer. Well, I say obviously, people may not know, but he is a composer. And I think he began while he was screenwriting as well. He kind of did composing in the early part of his career. But he loved the idea. And so he immediately thought of Westworld as being something that, because the team that created Westworld, again, they are very musically minded, and they have a fantastic relationship with Ramin, their composer. And so, he felt that they would be into the idea. So we then began the process, and I started talking to one of the producers, Noreen, and so she helped me navigate through the kind of whole legal pathway of clearing the clip with HBO. But the absolute thing that clinched it was really that we had the overwhelming support of the creators of the show and JJ. So, it was it was complicated to get through all of the kind of HBO side of, obviously they want to be careful that their IP is protected, totally understandably. But they were very enthusiastic as well. So it was a reasonably long process to get through the kind of legal side of things with HBO. Not because they weren't enthusiastic, because they were very enthusiastic, but just to ensure that all of the clearances had been done properly, and the usages that we needed to be able to give the competitors were all okay and in place. And so that was the process. I mean, in terms of whether, we're going to do any more, we're still getting entries in. We've had thousands of entries, and this has proved to be enormously popular. And I just can't think that far ahead at the moment. It wasn't intended that this would be some kind of new thing that we go around trying to persuade all the kind of best shows and films to give us some of their work print. But it was just an idea that kind of turned into this amazing opportunity for composers. So I'm just concentrating on getting through this one. Christian, this one's for you from S. Schmidt VFX. How do I find an agent to get work? What are the practical steps of making the transition from working for free to making money as a composer? Practical steps.
Someone asked me a question once of what's your ambition with the band that I had, and that's to get a record contract. And he went, well, that's not really an ambition. That's literally a legal contract. What do you want? What's that going to help you do? And it's like, well, I just record contract. He's like, well, do you want to tour the world? Do you want to shag lots of people? Do you want to be famous? All this kind of stuff. And I would ask yourself first why you feel you need an agent and what you expect them to do. My personal view is that agents are like friends who will help you get jobs across the line and will look after you when you have those jobs. Agents will put you up for stuff, but you will find that most of your jobs in the future will be through personal relationships. So I personally would make friends with agents. I think they're great to befriend if you're interested in assisting for other composers. And you'll often just go on file, but they will come to you because composers do need assistance, and it'll always be like the cavalry. But I think being friendly, not being stalky. Just keep a little note of when you've met someone, when you've emailed them, maybe wait another 3 months to 6 months to email them again, but do stay on their radar. And I would say the best time to approach an agent from a commercial point of view as a commercial composer is when you have a lead, or when you've just won something, or when you have a bit of interest, because that's when the agent can physically get their teeth into something. To sculpt someone from nothing is not necessarily something that agents do, because they're busy enough as it is.
I've got a question. I think it'd be interesting if Christian answered this one. How do you feel about the criticism you receive on the likes of VI Control regarding your marketing tactics, and how some might feel it's over the top?
I think that what I don't like about VI Control is it's a bunch of composers. And I think composers tend to be really lovely people, and it's just not the lovely environment that you'd expect from the lovely breed of people that are composers. So I get a bit disappointed where that's concerned. I think that Paul and I, this has not been a 12-year act, because honestly, that would be, sorry to speak of being from acting stock again, to be able to do an act for 12 years is pretty hardcore. We are who we are, and where marketing is concerned, we tend to have a cheeky approach to it. And when we do say things like a new chapter or this is a game changer, we genuinely think it is. I think one of the recent examples recently was the BBC Discover thing, where we said it all changes here. And what I really noticed was people just went, well, that's hardly a game changer. And then some people pointed out, well, they've done this, and there's probably, well, I can tell you there's tens of thousands of people who are now making orchestral music that weren't a week ago. I'm not bragging, it's just a fact. We've done that thing, and I'm really proud of it. We should all be really proud of it. But what I noticed, the response was, well, it's not a game changer for me.
So I've got a question from a user called Native VS. It's multiple questions in one. How about making the Labs engine available for plebs like us? Have you ever considered collaborating with another high quality and very high-end sample maker? And is there any point trying to hope for a more functional and efficient user interface for your plugins on the line of the contact interfaces? So maybe Paul, if you take that away.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure what the start of the question means. I mean, the Labs engine is... Oh, I see what they mean. They mean as a sample developer to put their own samples in. Okay. Well, it's not in our roadmap at the moment. So I just leave it at that for that part. So in terms of the second part of the question, in terms of collaborations, we love working alongside sample developers that we have loved over the years. 2 examples of that are Sound Dust, make fantastic stuff. And also The Unfinished, really incredible programming. And he did a cartridge for the eDNA Earth engine, which is really, really good. And love his stuff for all the different, synths that he programs for. Absolutely fantastic sounds. Third part of the question, Functional and efficient user interface. Well, just to keep this short, because I could talk for hours about this, we worked for 6 months with a design company called Us2. They're a UI design specifically, but kind of customer experience design. There was a huge amount of user testing, so we knew that 99% of the people who opened the interface would be able to intuit how it worked really, really quickly. And also to make sure that it was easy to use for visually impaired people as well. And a variety of other considerations that come into play when you're designing something that's supposed to be universally accessible. So that's the first thing. Now, in our roadmap, we have a version for kind of tweak heads, which is in progress. I'm not going to say when it's going to come because I don't want to promise a specific date and then have to roll that back because we don't like to put anything out until it's absolutely 100% functional. But there is a version, a kind of pro view that you'll be able to switch to, which is in our roadmap and will come at some point, so that you can have, as many controls. Look like a Boeing 787 Dreamliner. Is that the Dreamliner? Yeah, 787 cockpit. If you want it to look like that, there will be an opportunity to have all of those controls available on the front.
I'm going to split this into two. What's the worst trope you hear in demos from the unsigned to Oliver? And then what's the most embarrassing piece you've written to Louis?
Yeah, I think there's a very simple answer to this. And I think it's people trying to imitate someone and you can always hear who. And it's like, okay, well, that's already there. That's already kind of, and then it's better. I enjoy more hearing something. Maybe that's like, maybe it's a bit badly produced or someone forgot to, fade out nicely, but it's like, it has something to it. Like it's kind of its own voice, its unique voice. And that's much more useful than being able to, let's say, write technically super complicated and super fast notes, We always had this thing in Berkeley when I studied there that's, we made kind of fun out of one of our friends. I mean, he knows Snorri from Iceland. He would, as the Icelandic people do, write incredibly slow but beautiful music. And we'd just always make fun out of him, like, what's your next piece going to be? Is it going to be, 16th notes, but in like 20 BPM per minute this time? Or, But... yeah, I think it's just important to have to find your own style and not try to imitate someone else. And I think that's the most that I hear in demos, just to impress by being someone else and by having it tremendously loud. It's like when I put the thing on and I have my setting on like a normal setting where I listen to music, where I mix my stuff. And if I listen to someone's music and it blows my head off, it's like, it's really irritating, no? It's like...
Are you familiar with John Carpenter films at all? Halloween?
I mean, I've seen Halloween.
Well, I watched Escape from New York, and I just would really recommend watching that film sometime soon, because what it is the score is done by the director who is very limited, and his style is totally dictated by his limitations. So it's him on like 2 synths. But what's really fascinating is it gets you inside the mind of a director, and you watch this film and you listen to the score and you just go, really? That's all you needed? And I think it's a real education in, actually, there's something incredibly tense about the score because there's nothing in it. It's played really loud because it sits under the dialogue. And I think it's just really, it's a masterclass in score writing by a director who can't really write scores, writing a score for one of his films. So I would really recommend that.
Amazing.
I totally agree with you there, Oliver, on the other points. Louis, so I threw you under a truck with what's the most embarrassing...
I was wondering if I'd get in trouble if I mentioned a Spitfire demo. There was one I did for a monthly highlight. I think it was a brass one. It was symphonic brass or something, and I didn't have a lot of time to write it. I'm not too up to scratch with programming brass. I needed to do a video, sort of a walkthrough, and I was really confident, and the video felt good. Edited it all. And it seemed okay, but the piece was just not realistic in the slightest. So I've got to say that's probably my most embarrassing piece I've written. And it's not up anywhere now. It's been taken down.
I'm sure it's not as bad as you say. that was a very agonising noise.
So this question I'm going to throw open to the floor. It's from Adam McCready. Hi there. After the best part of 20 years, I'm transitioning from Logic to Studio One at the moment, as well as being a seasoned Ableton user. Does anybody else on the team use Studio One or have views on its relative merits, or any other DAW for that matter? Cheers, Adam. So I know that I've had my various experiences with different DAWs, but what about you guys? Have you always been Logic, or have you used other things as well?
Yeah, I mean, I started with GarageBand and then naturally sort of progressed onto Logic. But when I started working here, I got to grips a little bit with Ableton, and I'm slowly learning a bit of Pro Tools and Cubase. But yeah, it's Logic for me, just because I've kind of grown up with it. It feels the most natural to compose in. But using Ableton, I find that's quite an easy one to sort of make beats and songs and get little tunes out. But it's Logic for the more sort of serious stuff and film composing.
Okay, it's interesting. I think Ableton, yeah, I'm interested. I've got it installed and I really need to kind of dig into it a bit. But I remember when we went to see Harry Gregson Williams, Christian, he was using Ableton to do that kind of thing, to do his beats with. So yeah, I think they sometimes different kind of focus, aren't they? Or maybe they make you write in a different way, the different DAWs. What about you, Oliver?
I started with Pro Tools and Digital Performer. And I mean, it was very interesting to use Digital Performer. It's kind of prepared me in a good way because it's quite technical, I think. If you even look at it and the functions and everything, it's quite advanced. You have this tempo calculating thing, which is really useful. And then I used a bit of Ableton for electronic stuff. But now my main platform is Logic because it's just what we mainly use at Spitfire, and it kind of makes sense because I assisted Christian and you, Paul, and you guys were using Logic. I've been trying now to use Cubase. I've written our latest originals percussion demo there, and Luke from customer support helped me a little bit and gave me some tips. I think it's pretty cool. It feels a bit more analog, Cubase. So I could see myself maybe having it as a second DAW. It has some interesting approaches and ways of thinking about creating music. It might actually, it might make you writing different stuff. For audio editing, I prefer still to use Pro Tools for some reason.
Yeah, I wrote in Pro Tools for years, and it was only when I got into the kind of multi-computer, 600-700 track count, that obviously I had to move over to Logic and also use a bit of Cubase. But Pro Tools, the thing I loved about Pro Tools is that you could just chuck something over into audio. I mean, I know you kind of can in other DAWs as well, but there's something about Pro Tools that makes it so transparent for messing around with audio. It's really, really easy.
Yeah,
I do love that about Pro Tools. Christian, you've got some views on Digital Performer, haven't you?
Yeah, I've collaborated with Dario Marinelli, who is DP, and it is by far the best DAW for writing to picture. It's basically you just load up one session and that's the film, and you just switch between cues, and the cut and pasting is amazing. The way it does the kind of working free and then clicking tempo is really good. But the problem with DP is it thought it'd be fun to just go with a totally different nomenclature. So the transition the learning curve is too high. So I think regions are called chunks, and then it's just like all really absurd kind of language that it's decided to use, and it's stuck with now because there's a hardcore DP community. But yeah, I was Cubase originally. And do you still use the key commands that I used on Logic, Oliver?
Yes.
So Oliver uses Cubase key commands in Logic because the only reason I transitioned to Logic, which I've never liked as much as Cubase to work on, is because of the EXS24, which now doesn't have a name. And I think the good thing about Cubase as a good bet is that basically hands is on their case. So if you get Cubase on a PC, that is going to be the most kind of well-honed piece of software for writing to picture, simply because the person who's best at it works closely with Cubase and Steinberg. I hope I'm not saying the wrong thing by saying that, but that's the impression I get.
No, that's absolutely right, yeah. Absolutely right.
I've got a question for Paul. Is it true you recorded a live player for Hans Zimmer piano demo rather than using the samples? That's a rumor, apparently.
That's pretty funny. I haven't heard that rumor. But I can guess which demo you're probably talking about. I think it's a piece by Rachmaninoff, but it's a fabulous pianist and composer called Ben Onono, who played that for us, who's a very old friend of mine. And I think he studied at Chetham's and then the Royal Academy or the Royal College of Music, I can't remember which, but studied piano to an incredibly high level and is an incredible performer. But no, we didn't hire the hall air and get him to actually play the piano live. He simply did it in Logic with his controller keyboard. And I actually have the session as well. So, yeah, I could prove it. But yeah, that's pretty funny. I mean, that shows that it's a good sample library, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. But also, we are working composers, and we did start this library because we wanted better tools for composers. And we started this library by selling stuff to our friends. And since selling stuff to our friends, we've made lots more friends, like thousands more. So the idea that we would rip them off, I don't want to be too passionate about this, too culty, but it's a pretty onerous one for us, Paul, isn't it? We just don't really give a monkeys about just selling stuff for the sake of selling it. The process is amazing, it's romantic, the collaborations are brilliant. But if we think we're pulling a fast one on our mates, well, we wouldn't sleep at night, I don't think.
No, it's an absolutely terrible idea. The other thing is that we make stuff primarily for ourselves because we're, it's more
greedy.
More toys for the sandbox. So it'd be pretty pointless to make something. And we throw a lot of stuff away. We record things and bin them because they don't work. So pretty funny. But no, we didn't record a live player playing an actual piano. Well, in the sense that he's a live player, he is alive, then we did record a live player. But it's Ben Onono playing the sample library.
So I've got one from a user called Carnage SAS, and maybe Paul and Christian, if you take this one. They say, I've got a very cheeky one. What is your average profit margin on your products, or how much does it cost you to produce a product, for example, BBC SO?
Wow. Well, for obvious reasons, we can't go into a massive amount of detail, but I can say that BBC SO, for example, is very close to what you might call a joint venture. So that gives you an idea without me being totally explicit. But also we pay royalties to all of the musicians and many of the technical staff who work on our libraries. So I think we've paid over £4 million since we've been in business.
That's just in royalties. That's just in royalties. That's not the fees.
Yeah. I think it's over 7 million when you start to add in all the fees and for recording sessions and studio budgets and all that kind of stuff. So it varies. Our profit margin varies, and obviously we need to, we are a business. We need to make a profit so that we can pay our staff and continue to stay in business making stuff. So we do have to make a profit. Christian and I are both, I think I can speak for you as well, we're both kind of leap and the net will appear types. And I think to get into composition...
I've never heard that before, but that's totally what we are.
It's a kind of... you have to have an element of blind faith that you just forge ahead and someone once told me 99% of people give up. So if you don't give up, you will be in the 1% of people who haven't given up. And surely that increases your chances of succeeding quite dramatically. I think that, we've always kind of invested hugely upfront in things, feeling that if we feel like it's a really great idea and it's something that we would love to have and would love to use, as composers, then there are going to be enough other people who feel like us for us to be able to make that thing a success. So that's been our kind of driving force, I think, all the way along, hasn't it?
Yeah. So I'm gonna just keep Paul in the hot seat in the nicest possible. What? In the nicest possible please, I beg you, make something that isn't drowned in reverb. The close mics on stuff always sounds terrible. I do agree with that. Paul will get there in a minute, he says, throwing his partner under a truck. It seems like no one in the sampling community samples a truly playable instrument up close that doesn't sound awful. I think he's listening to the wrong libraries.
Yeah, I mean, there is quite a lot of dry stuff in our collection.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it might be worth moving on to that, but you might want to talk about engineers and what they think about close mics.
Yeah, well, the close mics are rarely used on scoring sessions. It's occasionally, if you have like a featured instrument, you want to really pull it forwards. Or on things like adding in a bit of the close mics to brass will give them more bite and more kind of punch. When you're recording orchestral stuff, I mean, obviously this is totally different. If you're making a score that is designed to sound like Tom Waits or something like that, then obviously that's very, very different. But if you're trying to reproduce the sound that an audience member gets when they sit in front of an orchestra and hear them play, then there is a certain amount of physical distance that has to happen. And also the sound emanating from the body of the instrument has to radiate in all directions and be bounced off, the ceiling, the floors, the walls, before it actually reaches you. And you get that very complex kind of combination of different sounds. Now, you just can't reproduce that by taking a close mic'd instrument and putting it through reverbs, however good the reverbs are. You can get it sounding really nice and stylized, and it can sound great, but it will never sound quite like the real thing. And the reason for that is because we, as humans, our ears have developed over hundreds of thousands, millions of years to help us prevent ourselves from being ambushed and killed by wild beasts. So they're quite highly tuned, and we can tell when something doesn't sound quite right. And so, we thought if you want to reproduce that sound, then record it exactly as it's recorded normally. So hire the incredible orchestra, put them in the amazing sounding room, stick all the mics up as if you were recording a film score, and just record one note at a time. And then when you play it back, you get that sound. Now, if you take a library like that and you turn off all of the tree mics and the outriggers and all that kind of stuff and just use the close mic, you're not getting the sound, because that's not how it's designed to sound.
An engineer would never go into the Hall Air Studios with the intention of just using close mics.
No.
They would just say, you have to go into a different space, which we have done.
Yeah. So we've got the studio range, which is a kind of very small space. And we've got our London Contemporary Orchestra libraries, which are recorded in an even smaller space. So those are pretty dry.
BDT.
And then, BDT as well, similar, recorded at the Spitfire Studios in London. But also, we've got, if you like, the kind of scoring stage sound, then the BBC Symphony Orchestra recorded in Maida Vale has exactly that sound. And it's not a big boomy hall, which gives you the massive lush reverb like Air. It's a more controlled sounding space. And it sounds very similar to that kind of American scoring stage, that kind of traditional sound. So here's a great question. One for your team's experience with both snake oil and scams. The question is from Mellifluous Fable and says, I know you yourself, Christian, once said you got caught out and lost a lot of money. For those looking to branch out, what to look out for, and any kind of warnings that we can give.
It's amazing how exploitative the industry can be. I mean, I have a friend who he was really good, kind of a crooner, and but an incredibly loving soul, and someone who he'd never heard of approached him, who had produced all of these incredible records, and it was kind of in the days before the internet. And they said, listen, we really want to talk to you, so come and meet us at our offices in New York. So he flew over to the office in New York, and it was insane, like this amazing office. And then they took him to these amazing recording studios, and they said to him, that we're going to possibly team you up with Mariah Carey and this, that, and the other, and we think that you're going to be the next big thing. And it was believable. He had it in him to be that kind of Celine Dion, but a male Celine Dion. And they said, okay, so we're going to sign you for $20 million. So we need you to go back to London. And he rang me up and he was just crying and he was in hysterics. He couldn't believe that he'd worked so hard to get there. The next portion he didn't tell me, but about a year later he rang me up and he was in equal amounts of tears. But basically what had happened was they said, in order for us not to expose ourselves, you need to pay our legal fees. Because basically it's like that thing of, okay, you get kind of offered a deal, then we go through the process of doing a thing, you turn it down, and then you just go to another record company. You can kind of see the logic in it. I love your face there, Paul. So he'd got his dad to remortgage his house, and the house was basically his dad's kind of retirement package for $250,000, and they handed over $250,000 and then disappeared off the face of the earth.
Oh my God, that's terrible.
But on a smaller level, these kind of things happen all the time. But Paul, you and I, we'd had that thing with sample libraries of buying things for a lot of money, and they've just been terrible. But also the other thing is, buying sample libraries and it's full of illegal, pirated stuff. And there are some big companies out there who we know are doing stuff. I mean, I'm not talking about piracy per se, but in sense are offering out sounds that are sampled from films and stuff,
Yeah, it's terrible. And you can get in a real mess with that kind of stuff. I know of a couple of cases with very, very big films where the score, where they've had to go do kind of, last minute clearances and for a lot of money because the score has used something from, that they thought was legitimate because it was in. It tended to happen more back in the 90s, but it's very, you have to be so careful. I'm not going to name any names, but there are some online purveyors of sounds where you can go buy, piecemeal, not people like us, not kind of sample library companies, but there are places where you can buy sounds, and there is stuff in there that I know, that there is legal action going on with things, and that there's stuff that's been ripped off from here, there, and everywhere. You've got to be so careful with this stuff,
because theoretically, the copyright holder, if they have a claim, can say you have to withdraw all of those films,
yeah.
and there are precedents for that.
Yeah.
Dark.
Maybe one for Louis here. Out of all the Spitfire samples, which one is the best buy for starting out with composition?
For me, I think, the first Spitfire library I actually got my hands on is Albion 1. It just kind of a very good starting off point. It has sort of all the orchestral instruments and some really interesting loops and sounds in that. So I guess if you're going for the more, cinematic route, then yeah, Albion 1. Funny story, actually. I won that in a sort of in-house Spitfire competition just around the time when Labs was getting sort of relaunched, and we had loads of like Lab stickers and things like that. And Will, the CEO, put out a little message saying, take these stickers and take a picture of them in the most creative way you can, and whoever is the most creative in the way they use these stickers gets to win a prize. So people were sticking them on the back of their laptops, on lamps, on plants. I stuck it on the ladies' toilets, and on the ladies' toilets I had a big F on it, so it spelled out Flabs, and I ended up winning Albion 1 by doing that, back when I was a temporary runner. So yeah, Albion 1.
Brilliant.
The first thing to do, I would say to anyone, is download all of the Labs. And there's a route. There's definitely a route now. There's a route. We've got these originals and also the Discover thing, which is really, really exciting. I think what's going on there.
We've got a question here for Paul. What's the naughtiest thing that Christian has ever done, in brackets, in the realm of Spitfire, and then maybe vice versa? Christian, what's the naughtiest thing that Paul's done?
How much time do you have, I think, is the answer to that.
Oh, wow. That's a difficult question to answer. So many naughty things. Saying dropping, as our American cousins would say, the F-bomb in the middle of a live webcast, launching a product with the BBC. That's probably fairly high up there. Yeah. there's kind of our kind of naughtiness. I mean, apart from just sort of potty mouth, our kind of naughtiness tends to be that we just egg each other on to do ridiculously bigger and bigger things, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the classic one was the beginning of the kind of inception, if I can use that word, of the Hans Zimmer strings. Was Christian suggesting 120 cellos and Hans saying, "Let's do it."
I said it as a joke.
I was just like, what? And then we obviously, Hans was excited by he was trying experiments anyway with the 32 basses for Dunkirk, and it became that kind of, okay, let's make some sounds for Dunkirk using this enormous string section, and that was how Hans Zimmer Strings was born. What about you? What have I done that's really...
Well, actually, I think for both of us, we've both done a tragic, or no, not a tragic, I think that's not the word I'd use. We've both done classic reply alls, each of us.
Yes. I remember that one.
There was the one before Christmas.
Yeah.
That was basically a very unhappy customer who, and this is early days when Paul and I were doing service, and I said, "Do you think this guy really is going to kill me?" Because that's what he kind of said. And Paul kind of went along the lines of something, "I know, ignore him, he's a bellend," or something like that, and then replied all. So he basically had death threats with it, and then you had to kind of find him and realise, oh no, he's no threat whatsoever, because he's kind of portly gentleman from the Midwest.
Yeah, church going with his arms around his grown-up daughters in Facebook. I was like, okay, he's just exercising his fingers on the keyboard, so that's fine.
My one was when one of the biggest companies in the world got in touch asking for some free software, and you responded, I think you CC'd me in to go like, how ridiculous is this? And you said, I think a company of your size can afford to buy your own. And I sent an email to Paul saying, no, give them some stuff, then we'll ask for a meeting, and then we can use that as leverage to get meetings with other companies, you bellend. And replied all.
Oh dear. That was so funny. I mean, the thing is,
I don't think I called you your bellend. I think it was just... it was something, we don't banter like that, but it was something along, I used a swear word or something.
Yeah. Oh dear. That was the days when we were still counting the individual sales and going, can we afford to do that? Because we need to sell another 3 copies of this library to...
I remember coming over on premium economy to visit you in LA because it was a quick turnaround. And I remember saying to you, I'm so sorry, mate, that I kind of insisted on that. I know that's 7 copies of Albion, and that we used to work in those kind of, and that would have been maybe 2 weeks of earnings. Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Why are woodwinds so hard to know what to do with? I play the saxophone, Christian, so be nice. I happily admit I'm only just getting into trying to write orchestral music, but each time I dabble with woodwinds, I feel like they stick out like a sore thumb.
Well, my recommendation would be listen to some Displa. He does some pretty incredible stuff with woodwinds. I think maybe try the opposite instead, to hide them. Try to make them the main feature at first to get a bit of a feel for it. I mean, not to sell stuff, but the studio woodwinds are pretty cool. You can do some very punchy stuff with it, some staccato lines, etc. You write maybe an ostinato with strings. Maybe try to write that with the woodwinds and really try to get a feel for it, how they sound. I guess in a traditional way, you would use them maybe you can start doubling up instruments, maybe try to double up the flute with the first violin, etc. Runs are always very typical for woodwinds. You can have them, fairly in the background, so you can just hear the texture of the woodwind without it sticking out like a sore thumb, as you say. What are some other tips? Maybe try using like something like the bassoon as like more like a lyrical line behind like a beautiful string arrangement. I think just get a feel for what woodwinds do, and the ear will get used to it, and listen to a lot of music where woodwinds is there. I think Steve Reich's done some cool stuff with woodwinds. Christian, remind me of there's a couple of pieces that are
variations for winds, strings, and organs. I think something like that is very good. My other thing is, when you hear an oboe in films, it's never an oboe, it's a cor anglais. So if you have a cor anglais in your library, try and do some lyrical lines with that. And I would say there's never a time when a very high bassoon solo line is never appropriate. I don't know of anything that takes a lead line better, particularly in the sampling world, than a legato bassoon playing in the gods. And the poor player that we had do our bassoon solo, she's having to play all of these impossible lines because they work so well with the samples up high, don't they, Paul?
They do, yeah. Yeah, I'd just second that. That's all good advice. I would also just look at the way that you can expand the bottom and the top of the orchestra with the woods. But yeah, it's really for adding kind of size, incredibly useful for adding size and kind of density and depth and impact. You don't, when you're playing them on their own, you think, oh, that's not going to make much difference. But actually, as you add these things in, it really does add up. It really makes a massive difference.
And also texturally, like adding bass clarinets to cello lines is enormous. Contrabassoons are bassier than anything else in the orchestra. But also, I would say if you want to just if you could take an orchestra to 11, you've got bass drums and timpani and French horns and all that kind of stuff. But the thing that takes it to 11 is the piccolo. Rips on a piccolo make it. It is just shrieking harridans.
And one last thing to add, I think check out orchestral swarms, because you basically hold one key and it's prearranged in a way. You have these beautiful woodwind textures, so you don't need to be preoccupied about how to orchestrate it or how to use it. Just get your hands on it and play around a little bit on the keyboard and see what these kind of recorded phrases do.
Here's one for you, Christian. In fact, there's two questions here which I'm going to combine. Will you be moving any of your libraries that use Contact over to your own plugin in the future? For various reasons, I've dumped everything from Complete and would love to get some more of your smaller libraries if they were usable in your plugin. And that's kind of combines with what was the basic reason to create your own sampler for the BBC and Labs instruments. So those two.
I'm going to answer it in reverse. The reason that we did it was we have a wonderful relationship with Native Instruments and are very thankful to them for the platform, because basically Paul and I were creating building our company on the Gigasampler platform, and it died. It went bust. That taught us in itself lots of lessons. But also, we basically wanted to push the boundaries of technology, and we didn't want to have to wait for Native Instruments to do it. And I think that really, whilst it may seem like a very long throw, one of the real ambitions was this Discover thing, the idea of being able to mode switch. And it's just something you cannot do on Contact, and it's because it's not their focus, and that's fine. So we've been on this massively long journey, and I would say that's one of the first real fruits of that. We will be supporting both platforms and believe they both have their strengths, and some things that we put out on our own plugin haven't done as well as others, but it is, I would argue, one of the most successful sample platforms on the planet now because of Labs, so we are going to continue developing it. And I think that's something that's really important to kind of point out. There are lots of comparisons between the two, but I think we're still on 1 point something, aren't we? Whereas most other technology companies are in the tens and all of that kind of stuff. So, but we have a full-time engineering team. It's not something we've farmed out and bought in. We're continuing to develop it, and there's some amazing stuff to look forward to in the future. Right, gents, we are running out of time. So should we keep going in rotation, but see if we can try and answer these in a quick fire kind of single sentence kind of way?
Got a quick one for Louis. While both of these libraries are actually amazing, I feel, this person is asking, should I buy Oliver Arnold's Toolkit or Stratus?
Stratus. For anyone, can you honestly recommend anyone to strive for a career in the music business?
Yeah. You just have to move with the times. I think that Paul and I work with people who move with the times, and they continue to be successful. And we work with people who sit in the pub and moan about, I used to make so much money out of sheet music, and it's like, well, it's right at the end of the technology, and that's what's so great about it. And you've got to be anyway. I'll shut up. But yeah, of course.
Christian, are you still annoyed with yourself that you weren't able to scratch off the text on your Big Sky?
Yeah, I've given my Big Sky away. I love it, but you just hear it on everything. And I'm using lots of other amazing Strymon products. Why do you use Dirt for keyboards, as they're certainly inferior to Kawai, for example?
I don't anymore, actually. I did for many years because they were. I found them really great to play, but now I use this incredible keyboard by Viscount called the Physis K4. And I'd highly recommend those. Got lots and lots of controllers on it, and the keyboard feels incredible. Christian, what separates successful film music makers from the rest?
Just creating your own voice. Why be someone else that person's already taken? And it's fun making big orchestral scores, but if you have to imagine that when you're first breaking in, that by the third CD that a director's listening to of orchestral music, it just sounds all the same. Make your own voice, work with what's around you, and embrace your limitations, because they say style is defined by limitation.
What Spitfire release exceeded your expectations in terms of sales? Can you name some libraries that were in development that you've ended up scraping?
Yeah, one of the proudest things that's happened recently is me not getting and understanding libraries. So I'd say the LCO range and Stratus recently were libraries that I was worried about. And they are wonderful libraries, and that's what's wonderful about working with young people, is that they're taking what Paul and I started and are pushing the boundaries, and that basically means that you don't have to rely on Paul and I to continue pushing the boundaries. But we'll have a good old go, won't we, Paul?
Absolutely, we will.
Any libraries that were in development that you've ended up scraping? Did I say scraping? Scrapping.
Yes, there's been lots and lots. Yeah.
And sometimes we record stuff and it doesn't work for the way that but it gives us an idea to do something else, and we end up going in a different direction with things.
I think the most interesting experience, because it was more of a hunch, but when we actually proved it to ourselves, Paul, do you remember when we made Albion 1 before we released the new Albion 1? Remember where we made it too perfect?
Yes.
And we had to rewind 6 months, to put the mistakes back in.
Yeah.
Okay, one for Ollie. What do we do other than making product tutorials?
Ooh, cynical. I actually looked at the question before, and since this is a fast one, I actually have a list, a big thing of what the music production team does. I'm going to keep it very short, but we help with testing new products. So Q&A, we help creating all the assets for major releases, originals, essay recordings, labs. We do demos, playthroughs, trailers, in-action videos, monthly highlights. We help creating content. There was a series called Selects, teasers. Then we try to be present in a community, like at events. We prepare presentations. At the moment, it's more online, so we give like tutorials online at different universities, etc. We do little things, for example, like video creation. So from demos we do the screen flow and stuff.
I think something that I'm really enjoying recently is we're chucking stuff between us more. I've always thrown stuff to Paul to you and I just listen to each other's garden, give each other a few notes. Sometimes you master something for me. And it's
really useful to get another pair of ears on.
Absolutely, yeah. Then we're now a big proper company, so there's meetings and stuff to attend, lots of them. But yeah, and then there's some more artistic stuff to raise our own profile, working on short films, working on films. I've created my own album last year and a sample library. It's never really boring, I guess.
We'll have to remain professional composers. That's something we really, stipulate. This is a question for me, so I'm just going to throw it straight over to you, Paul. What about the stony issue of pricing? You will have aggrieved many people in the past with your twice-yearly sales. Obviously, when people first discover Spitfire, they will not be aware of these and will more likely not have paid 40% higher than most of us do. Why don't you just reduce everything by, say, 30% and keep it at that price throughout the year?
It's an interesting question. I mean, the thing is, we buy stuff all the time in every area of our lives, knowing that at some point that company will have a sale and will reduce the prices, and it might be the New Year sale or whatever, but you still buy your Christmas presents before December the 25th. I think for things that are kind of non-essentials, you park it in the back of your mind and you think, I'll get that. I don't really need that at the moment, but I'll get it when there's a sale on. And I do that as well. But I just think about, I've always bought things to use them. And I've always, if I get a new piece of equipment or something like that, it's to write music with it. It's to kind of create something. And I think once I've got that value from it, I feel good about the fact that I bought it. And, for us, we do have sales because we want to try and allow as many people to use our products as possible and be creative with them. However, I don't feel bad about the fact that we have sales sometimes during the year, because when we sell things that are full price, a significant cut of the money that we get when we sell something goes to the musicians who played on it. So it enables our company to keep, trying new stuff and making more stuff.
Yeah, that's a key thing, is we're not static. There are a lot of the last generation of sample instruments were very much, you bought your strings and that was it. You're sorted. And we don't believe in that. We believe in keeping things moving. And I just think it's like any other business. You have to kind of go, okay, well, let's move on from that. So let's all enjoy this stuff and prepare for the new. Because again, I maintain, and mark my words, particularly with this lockdown stuff, the demand for music, the demand for content is going to increase through the roof. And the demand for us to be able to create stuff in little sheds like this is going to increase as well. So it's just great that we are using performances just at a different point in the workflow kind of chain, really. Yeah.
My final thing would be that before I became a sample developer, my first orchestral library that I bought cost me over £7,000. So that is, at the time, over $11,000. So the fact that you can now get something, that is better than that for a tenth of the price is just amazing, and it's part of the growth of creating music. It's fantastic. How much of a composer's skill do you attribute to their skills with the keyboard?
I think that there's a kind of a bell curve of stuff that you need to do as a media composer. It's like massive. It can be production, orchestration, performing stuff playing the piano if you want. And I think all of us kind of somewhere in the middle of this bell curve, we're kind of able to do a bunch of different things fairly well. But, you'll have someone like Benjamin Valfish. He's an insane orchestrator, so he'll play to that strength. I used to be a drum programmer, so I'll play to that strength. And I know a piano player, a composer like Dario Marianelli is an excellent piano player, and he'll play to that strength. So we all have weaknesses and strengths. And I think what's wonderful about this industry and going into it is I can walk into the room, and I would have been maybe 27 years old, walk into Anne Dudley's studio, someone who is so much more experienced than me, has so much more kind of many more chops, and she will learn stuff of me as well as me learning stuff of her. And that's the beauty of music and technology, is that we've all got so much to learn off each other.
Maybe one for Paul. Will Spitfire expand from orchestral-based instrumentation, or is that the primary focus?
Interesting question. I mean, we do record other stuff. We've got a variety of different things in our catalogue so far, and we're always interested in all areas of music. But our kind of core, the thing that informs the way that we produce things, is the orchestral sample library. It's an incredibly difficult thing to create. It's in some ways the most difficult thing to create. And we love that. It's kind of in our hearts at the core of everything that we do. But it's a great place to explore from.
I've got a question for Christian here from Brandon. why not make a dedicated piano book plugin to make sure everyone is able to use each sample instrument?
Developing software is an absolute... It's very difficult. And this is something that, Paul, you and I didn't really realise when we went into it. And we're very pleased to have done it. But the investment, both energy, finance and time, has been enormous. It's not as easy as people think. It's fine if you're all on the same system. OK, here's the thing. Have you ever tried sharing Logic projects with a friend who's got exactly the same libraries with you, same computer and stuff? It's difficult, isn't it? Now imagine that writ large across the global community on different computers running different operating systems, running different processors and all of that kind of stuff. It's a lot harder than people think. Paul, question for you, and I think a fitting one to end on. When will you work with John Williams?
Oh my goodness. In my dreams.
And those dreams have come true. You know, I thought we would never beat the telephone call from Hans Zimmer. I don't think he would mind us saying that when the Bernard Herrmann estate got in touch, that was taking it to 11, was it not?
It was, yeah. It was so incredible, so wonderful. I mean, I've always loved Herrmann's stuff since I was 6-7 years old, watching the films that he scored, things like Jason and the Argonauts, and I even wrote essays on Herrmann's music while I was at college doing my MA in music. So to be able to sit and look through his handwritten scores was just like finding the Holy Grail. I mean, just incredible. He was an insanely amazing musician before he even started writing film music. So just one of the absolute masters.
Fantastic. Well, gentlemen, we're going to have to draw it to a close. Thanks so much for doing this. But I think it's been a lot of fun. And how have you found it? What did we do? What was crap about it? What was good about it? Put it in the comments down below. And there's a poll above of whether you think we should go probing again. Thank you so much for all of your fantastic, enthusiastic questions. And I hope we got around to as many of them as we did. And we could have, and I feel we've been as honest as we possibly could. So thanks ever so much for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Ding that bell to be notified the next time I put a video up. And one of those for these three amazing gentlemen would be much appreciated. See you next time. Ta-da!
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Bye-bye.
That was great.
Yeah, I'm just
That was fun.